The morning light spilled across Studio 1A in the soft, honeyed way it always did, the city outside still rubbing sleep from its eyes. The plaza was filling with the familiar shapes of signs and smiles, coffee cups steaming against the winter air. On most days, the rhythm was predictable. Camera cues, gentle laughter, a shared warmth that reached through the glass and into millions of homes. But this morning felt different. There was a hush, almost reverent, like the pause before a breath you don't yet know you need to take. Jenna Hager sat in her chair with a poise she'd practiced for years, a smile that had steadied countless conversations. Yet something beneath that smile flickered, an unspoken weight, a tremor of sincerity that couldn't be rehearsed. When the red light blinked on, it wasn't just another segment. It was a moment that would ripple outward, quietly at first, then with surprising force. She began simply, a greeting, a thank you, a glance toward the crowd that said, "I see you." And then she spoke about the thing that had been pressing on her heart. Nothing scandalous, nothing explosive, just a truth she hadn't planned to share but knew she had to. She talked about exhaustion that goes beyond tired muscles, about the courage it takes to show up even when your spirit feels tender. She spoke of family, how love can be both anchor and ache, and of responsibility, the kind that hums beneath your days until you realize it's been shaping you all along. The studio listened. Her co-host leaned in, not to interrupt, but to hold space. Jenna's voice didn't crack. It steadied. That somehow made it more powerful. Vulnerability doesn't always announce itself with tears. Sometimes it arrives calmly, asking only to be believed. By the time the segment ended, something had shifted. The applause wasn't louder than usual, but it lasted longer. In living rooms and kitchens across the country, people set down their mugs and nodded. They recognized themselves in her words. The truth Jenna shared wasn't a headline, it was a mirror. Within minutes, messages poured in. Social media lit up with stories from viewers who'd felt the same quiet heaviness, the same pull between gratitude and strain. Teachers wrote about carrying classrooms on their shoulders. New parents admitted they were learning to ask for help. Caregivers whispered thanks for saying out loud what they hadn't dared to name. Jenna's name trended not because of shock, but because of solidarity. What really happened? People asked, hungry for a plot twist. But the answer refused to be sensational. What happened was simpler and braver. A woman known for warmth chose honesty over polish. She reminded everyone watching that resilience doesn't mean never bending. It means knowing when to lean. As the day unfolded, a small moment from the broadcast took on a life of its own. Someone clipped a line Jenna had said almost offhandedly. "We don't owe the world perfection. We owe each other kindness." It traveled fast. It landed gently. It stuck. In the afternoon, fans gathered on the plaza with signs that echoed that sentiment. "You're not alone," one read. Another said, "Thank you for being real." Jenna emerged during a break, wrapped in a coat and surprise, her hand over her heart. She laughed, a soft, incredulous sound, and waved. Cameras caught her blinking back emotion, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she was understood. Behind the scenes, colleagues shared stories of their own. A producer admitted she'd almost quit last year. A makeup artist talked about caring for a parent while chasing deadlines. The studio became briefly a sanctuary of shared humanity. It's easy to forget that television sets are built by people carrying invisible lives. That day, those lives were honored. Later, Jenna wrote a note to viewers. Not a statement, not an explanation, a thank you. She spoke about the letters she'd received over the years, how often they arrived at just the right moment. She confessed that she'd hesitated before speaking that morning, unsure if it was enough to matter. The response answered her question. It always does. The following days brought a wave of kindness. Book clubs sent photos of dog-eared pages with messages scribbled in margins. Parents shared snapshots of bedtime stories, tagged with gratitude for mornings made gentler by familiar voices. People didn't ask for details, they offered presence. In an age addicted to answers, that restraint felt radical. There were, of course, critics, there always are. A few insisted vulnerability had become a performance, that public figures should keep their hearts private. Jenna didn't respond directly. She didn't need to. The chorus of support spoke louder, reminding everyone that empathy isn't a trend, it's a choice. What really happened was not a fall, but a gathering, not a confession, but a connection. Fans rallied around Jenna not around a crisis, but around courage. Weeks later, the echo of that morning still lingered. Jenna returned to her familiar cadence, interviews, laughter, the steady flow of stories. But something had deepened. Viewers noticed it in the pauses she allowed, the way she listened with her whole face. She asked questions that made room for complicated answers. She didn't rush to wrap things up neatly. Life, she seemed to say, doesn't always tie bows. In one segment, she interviewed an author who wrote about resilience. Halfway through, the author turned the tables and asked Jenna what she'd learned recently. Jenna smiled and answered without hesitation. "I've learned that letting people show up for you doesn't make you weaker. It makes the circle bigger." The studio hummed with recognition. That lesson traveled too. It reached a high schooler who decided to talk to a counselor, a nurse who asked for an extra day off, a grandmother who finally shared a story she'd carried for decades. No one traced these moments back to a single broadcast. That's not how ripples work, but they happened all the same. The rally around Jenna wasn't loud forever. It didn't need to be. Support settled into something quieter and more enduring. Trust. The kind built when someone proves they'll meet you where you are, not where you're supposed to be.
Months later, Jenna stood again in Studio 1A, sunlight doing its faithful work. She looked out at the crowd and felt the familiar mix of nerves and gratitude. The show went on. It always does. But beneath the routine, there was a shared understanding between host and viewer, speaker and listener, that something honest had passed between them, and neither would forget it. So when people ask what really happened, the answer remains beautifully unsatisfying to those craving drama. Nothing broke, no secret exploded. A woman told the truth in a gentle way, and the world answered gently back. In a time when noise often drowns out meaning, that exchange felt like a small miracle. And maybe that's why fans rallied, not because Jenna needed saving, but because she reminded them that we save each other every day, with listening, with kindness, with the courage to say, "Me too." And in the end, that was the update everyone needed.